Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into something really significant, a source that tackles the very foundations of how we diagnose mental health conditions.
That's right. It's a fascinating area looking at neurodivergence, clinical science, and importantly, social policy.
And we're focusing on this big trend towards, well, data-driven psychiatric reform.
Yeah, and we've basically got two viewpoints clashing here. First, there's the scientific promise, like in this big Forbes paper from 2024 called Reconstructing Psychopathology.
Okay.
It's all about using data to rebuild the symptom lists in the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual, aiming for real scientific accuracy.
Right, the promise of precision. But then the other side.
The other side is this really pointed critique from a neurodivergent perspective. It argues this whole reform isn't liberation at all. It argues it's just, well, rebranding control, making it look scientific, statistical.
So a kind of consolidation of power through data.
That's the core tension, yeah. Science says it's helping people, solving suffering. The critique says it's actually just perfecting the systems that cause or manage that suffering differently.
Okay, so our mission today, for you listening, is to really unpack this idea that science, promising freedom through data, might actually be, as the critique puts it, rebuilding a kind of cage, just in cleaner code. We need to dig into what the source calls this bait and switch of precision psychiatry. Let's start with the science itself, the ambition of it.
Okay. Well, you can't ignore the scale of that Forbes paper. It's huge.
Right.
It explicitly aims to overcome the DSM's categorical limits. Think about the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's like it sorts things into neat boxes, depression here, anxiety there.
Separate rooms. Yeah.
Exactly. These reformers, they want to basically take all the symptoms, all the pages out of those books and resort them based purely on, well, mathematical patterns in the data.
So breaking down the old diagnoses into smaller pieces, symptoms, and then rebuilding them into these new dimensions based on what the data actually shows. How do they even do that? Statistically, I mean.
Well, it was a massive undertaking. We're talking nearly 15,000 people.
Wow.
Across 2 continents, they looked at 680 different symptoms.
680, good grief.
Yeah, and used some pretty complex stats, things like hierarchical principal components analysis.
Okay, hierarchical principal components. That sounds intense. Can you break that down a bit? What does it actually do?
In simple terms, it's like a super-powered pattern finder. It tries to find the deepest, most fundamental axes or dimensions of psychological distress.
So instead of just saying, this is depression.
Right. It asks, what's the underlying factor here? What explains why sadness and fatigue and maybe appetite changes often show up together? It's looking for those basic building blocks, those mathematical dimensions that might explain all psychopathology.
It sounds like a logical next step, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Psychiatry's tried to fix itself using science before. This isn't totally new.
Oh, absolutely not. And the critique points this out very clearly. They call it a pattern of self-correction by reinvention. Think back. You had DSM-3 aiming for more reliability in categories. Then RDOC came along.
RDOC, that's the research domain criteria, focused on biology.
Exactly, trying to link symptoms to observable biology like brain circuits or genetics. And then there's HITOPY.
The hierarchical taxonomy of psychopathology.
Yeah.
More dimensional trait-based.
Precisely. They're all trying to get away from the problems of the old DSM categories, which often felt a bit arbitrary.
Right.
But the critique's point is sharp. Each new version, while claiming better science, actually just deepens the ambition to, quote, manage difference under the banner of care.
Hold on, though. If the science aims for better measurement, more reliability, surely better outcomes are the goal. Isn't good?
Yeah.
How can measuring progress be seen as negative? It sounds like maybe confusing the method, the data, with the potential use of it, maybe by funders or policymakers.
That is the absolute crux of the argument the source makes. It highlights this language, the Trinity, they call it, progress, mechanisms, and outcomes.
Okay.
These words sound positive, right? Who doesn't want progress? But the critics argue that when you apply these concepts within systems that are, let's say, geared towards control or efficiency, then the human becomes still a mechanism, just one you understand better. And progress starts to mean getting better at predicting and controlling that mechanism, not necessarily liberating the person.
Ah, I see. So it's about technical efficiency versus maybe human understanding or flourishing.
That's exactly it. Which brings us to this bait and switch idea.
Right. The bait sounds amazing. Freedom through data, Understanding that goes beyond rigid labels.
A model reflecting the whole breadth of psychopathology, as they say. Very appealing.
But the switch.
According to the critique, the switch is where that promise flips. Instead of liberation, you get enclosure through quantification.
Enclosure through quantification, meaning?
Meaning, the moment you turn lived experience, messy, complex, human, into data points on a chart.
Okay.
The goal shifts. It's less about understanding meaning, like why someone feels this way, and more about achieving technical control, prediction, efficiency, knowing, as the source puts it, which lever to pull.
Okay, so it becomes reductionist, reducing experience to variables.
Totally. And the critique contrasts this with other ways of thinking, like the power threat meaning framework, the PTMF.
Right, I've heard of that. It asks different questions, doesn't it?
Fundamentally different. Instead of psychiatry's "what is wrong with you," the PTMF asks, "what happened to you?"
That's a huge shift. What happened immediately brings in history, trauma, social context, oppression.
Exactly. It demands you look at the person's story, their environment.
Whereas what is wrong looks for an internal defect, a mechanism to fix.
Precisely. Understanding mechanisms sounds objective, scientific. But the critique argues it's an act of reduction. Story becomes sequence, meaning becomes correlation. The data gives you variables to manage, not necessarily deeper human understanding.
And to make this less abstract, the critique uses a really specific, quite powerful story about how this kind of reform can impact someone's life. Tell us about that sensory profile example.
Yeah, this really brings it home. It's about someone diagnosed under the old DSM-IV system with sensory integration disorder.
Okay.
Now, that diagnosis wasn't just a label, it was practical. It was the specific language they needed to get accommodations. Proof, if you like, that fluorescent lights genuinely felt painful, like needles.
So it was directly tied to getting support they needed, legal, practical support.
Exactly. But then DSM-5 came along, and sensory integration disorder as a distinct category vanished.
Where did it go?
It got, quote, folded into autism spectrum disorder, absorbed into this broader category, this broader mechanism.
And the result for the person?
They lost the specific vocabulary, the language they needed to argue for those essential accommodations in, say, a workplace or school. It was gone. Their specific reality was, as the source says, dissembled into a scatterplot of deficits. It stripped them of the clear language needed to state their needs and rights.
So reform promised more nuance, a better view, but for them it actually erased the specific evidence of their disability and potentially their access to support.
That's the lived consequence highlighted in the critique, a very personal cost of this kind of technical reclassification.
Okay, so that's the personal impact. But then this dimensional approach, everything's a gradient, a spectrum. When that idea moves from the clinic into policymaking, the stakes get even higher, especially, you imagine, when budgets are tight.
Absolutely. This is where the critique gets really sharp about policy implications. It basically argues that every new taxonomy, every new classification system is like a hidden policy draft.
How so?
Well, this dimensional turn, the idea that traits exist on a spectrum. It sounds sophisticated, but in an era of austerity politics, it's potentially very dangerous.
Guys.
Because if everything's a continuum, if there are no clear dividing lines, it becomes much easier for governments to argue for scaling back support, for cutting categorical entitlements.
Because if everyone's a little bit neurodivergent, who really needs or deserves dedicated funding?
Exactly. The source has this brilliant line, "You can't legislate support for a slope." Clear categories, whatever their flaws, allow for clear entitlements. Dissolve those categories into smooth gradients, and suddenly it's easier to push responsibility back onto the individual. Manage yourself. Learn coping mechanisms.
And this has a direct impact on neurodivergent people, right?
Yeah.
The critique talks about a kind of hierarchy emerging, especially around the term profound autism.
Yes. This is framed as the next act of triage. Using dimensional data, the system can effectively collapse the broad spectrum into a much narrower hierarchy of need.
So only those deemed most severely affected, the core or maybe level 3 support needs.
They might still qualify for significant, lifelong state support and funding.
But what about everyone else? People with level 1 or 2 needs, people diagnosed later in life, people whose experiences don't fit the neatest boxes, maybe due to other marginalizations.
The argument is they get pushed towards what the source calls behavioral markets and self-help mantras.
Meaning
They're told they're resilient, they should focus on personal optimization, maybe buy apps, attend workshops. It shifts the burden. It's an economic sorting mechanism dressed up as science.
sorting who gets public help, versus who has to manage or pay for their own support.
That's the core argument.
So precision psychiatry, in this view, isn't just about precise diagnosis, it's enabling a more precise sorting for austerity purposes, replacing public provision with personal optimization.
And using scientific language, the critique argues, to mask what's fundamentally an arithmetic of extraction, taking resources away or shifting responsibility.
Wow, okay. The vocabulary of precision hides the logic of budget cuts.
That's the claim. It notes how research funding might flow to studying high-need groups, while the public narrative simultaneously pushes independence and self-reliance for others. It's selective.
Okay, so if that's the critique of the current path of finding control, enabling austerity was the alternative proposed. The source talks about socialist reconstruction. That sounds radical.
It is a radical reframing. It steps right outside the purely medical model.
No.
The core idea is simple but profound. What if the distress we see, the anxiety, the overload, the difficulty coping isn't primarily a sign of broken individuals?
Yeah.
What if it's a signal of disordered systems? A sign that the world is broken, not the people?
So the whole project flips. Instead of fixing people to fit the world, you fix the world to fit the people. We need to be clear for the listener, though, what socialist reconstruction means here. It's not just about changing labels again, is it?
Not at all. It's about a fundamental reordering of society's priorities and structures. It's about rebuilding the social fabric itself. The argument is basically you can't expect healthy minds in a fundamentally unhealthy, inequitable society.
So instead of fine-tuning definitions of disability,
You build the infrastructure that allows everyone, including neurodivergent people, to flourish by default.
what does that look like in practice? What kind of specific changes does this vision propose? What's the neurological infrastructure they talk about?
It's about concrete systemic changes, things like universal basic income, universal care, health care, child care, elder care, secure, accessible social housing.
And why call that neurological infrastructure?
Because, the argument goes, these things directly reduce the chronic, grinding, material stress, poverty, precarity, lack of support that often massively exacerbates neurodivergent challenges. They provide a stable base.
And what about daily life? Things like work and school.
Those systems would need a complete overhaul. Paced by human needs, attention, movement, and sensory rhythm, as the source puts it, rather than rigid, often punitive, productivity targets and clocks.
Making support an automatic right, not something you have to fight for.
Exactly. And belonging is just assumed. It's not something you have to earn by masking or performing neurotypical social skills or having endless endurance. Mutual aid, community support, that becomes the default way we provide care, not an afterthought.
It's a very different vision, but it immediately brings up the big practical question, doesn't it? The one politicians always ask. The source tackles it directly. How will you pay for it?
It does. And the answer isn't just theoretical. It's a direct, stark comparison designed to completely reframe how we think about what's affordable. The resources, it argues, are already there.
How do they make that case?
With a really powerful financial contrast.
Yeah.
It takes the estimated lifetime cost of just one militant program, the F-35 fighter jet program,
Okay.
which is estimated at over $1.7 trillion.
Trillion with a T.
With a T. And it contrasts that single expenditure with what it would cost to provide high-quality, universal in-home care for every single disabled person in the country. Not just for 1 year, but for decades.
Wow. That certainly puts things in perspective.
It forces you to stop thinking about pure arithmetic and start thinking about political choices. The source argues the real question isn't can we afford care, it's who decides what we value enough to pay for.
Framing it as war versus care. Military spending often seen as essential, sacred almost.
While collective well-being, mutual aid, care infrastructure, that's always presented as unaffordable, negotiable, a luxury.
Okay, so let's pull back to the main tension here. We have psychiatry's ongoing reconstruction, using data, aiming for precision, but potentially leading to finer surveillance, reducing stories to variables, maybe enabling austerity.
Trading futures for better diagnostics, perhaps?
And the alternative reconstruction calls for something totally different. Solidarity, social repair, fixing the disabling systems themselves.
Yeah. And the source ties it back historically with this quite devastating closing thought. It mentions Freud's famous betrayal.
Where he initially believed his patients' stories of abuse, then later recast them as fantasies, as hysteria.
Exactly. A move often seen as protecting powerful men in Vienna at the expense of vulnerable patients. The source suggests that this same dynamic, substituting a power-preserving theory for uncomfortable lived truth, is happening again.
But this time,
This time it's just coded in R.
yeah, the statistical programming language.
Yeah, the tools change psychoanalysis to statistics, but the function of power, the critique argues, can remain the same.
That's a heavy thought. Okay, so maybe we can leave our listeners with this final point to consider, building on the source. What if the most meaningful act of precision psychiatry, the most rigorous insight we could gain, isn't found in the next factor analysis or biomarker?
What if it's found in actually noticing, documenting, and understanding the systemic pressures, the political, economic, social dissonances that our most sophisticated data models are perhaps unintentionally or intentionally designed to ignore?
Something to think about. Thank you for diving deep with us today.